welcome to the Small Caps podcast. I'm Peter Capsanis. This week our show is going to take you across mining, COVID-19 and sport. That's right, a whole raft of industries bonded by one person. Today's guest could be described as passionate, vocal and at times polarising. He's worked in Australia's mineral fields and boardrooms across South America, Africa, China, Southeast Asia, Russia and Eastern Europe. His achievements include industry recognition as Executive of the Year, Mining Identity of the Year, Dealmaker of the Year. He's also been involved in publishing, fashion, broadcasting, and most notably in sport as the sole owner of Perth Glory Football Club. More recently, he stepped away from a controversial deal that would have seen his football club merge with a London-based Bitcoin agency, which at the time triggered many doubtful looks from onlookers. To tell us more, I'm speaking none other than the one and only Tony Sage. Tony, thanks for your company.
No worries, Kappa.
It's an impressive CV and I want to cover off a fair whack with you. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, for those not aware, you started out as a chartered accountant in Perth. How did your mining story kick off from that?
Oh, geez, that was a long time ago. Yeah, look, I graduated in 1980 and worked for a couple of chartered accounting firms until 83. And then there was a little startup funds management group that started off in 1983, Growth Equities Mutual. So basically, I joined as an accountant and then became a fund manager. And it was tremendous growth in that industry. But being located in Western Australia, a lot of the investments I made at the time were in the mining sector. So when the business was sold to Lend-Lease in 96, I started up my mining career in 97. My first investment was in Romania, and that was an old government-run gold mine. Today's numbers are fantastic on it. We sold it in 2001, but my initial investment was 4 million through an investor group, not all myself. We raised 75 million, we drilled it, and we ended up finding 11 million ounces of gold. So it was a fantastic gold mine in the end. We sold it to Newmont, who have since increased that reserve to about 16 million ounces of gold. So it was a fantastic foray as my first foray into the industry. Lambert started probably a year after that.
Which Cape Lambert, FE Limited, European Lithium, these are all ASX listed companies right now, which you're involved with as chairman. They sit in the exploration space with projects across Australia and overseas. With the onset of COVID-19 in full force, how have your projects been affected, Tony?
Oh, look, hugely. A lot of the assets are not in Australia, so travel has been restricted. So I've got my CEO of my European lithium assets stuck in his home base in Brisbane. He cannot travel back to Austria, where the mine is. So that's just one significant setback. The other one is in Cape Lambert. Our major asset is in Sierra Leone, and we're trying to regain our license, but with travel restrictions, we can't get there. A lot of the, especially in Sierra Leone, a lot of the technology is not there, so we can't do the phone hookups like we're doing now. It's more difficult, but in the end, it's personal relationships that you need to keep. So that's really severely hampered. But one of the most disappointing things during COVID-19 is the lack of government support. Every other industry, it seems, is getting support through JobKeeper, the loans through the banks. But because we're an explorer as such, we have no income. And to get these loans from the bank and to get JobKeeper, you need to show a 30% drop in your income. As everyone who's listening that's in the exploration space knows, that we have no income. We raise money in equity and go out and we drill, we find projects, etc., etc. But especially with two of the most senior cabinet ministers coming from WA, I find that astounding that they haven't thought about the whole of the exploration industry, and we really need help. We want to keep our geologists, our geophysicists, our mining engineers on staff, but there is no opportunity for us to do so.
Well, we had WA Mining Minister Bill Johnston on the show last week, where he did mention, Tony, about funding available for Australian explorers doing it tough amid the global pandemic. Is that money you can access for exploration in relation to any of your Australian domestic assets?
No, not at the moment. We do have an opportunity. We're drilling in FE Limited up at Hillside. We've got, we think, a good copper gold potential. But yeah, again, we can't access the JobKeeper. We can't access a loan from the bank. And the minister has put out guidelines, but no specific information how we can access funds to maintain the drilling programs that we've got planned. It is a shame because, you know, this hiatus, what the country needs is more discoveries to keep our reputation as a big exporter going. And we're obviously very number one in iron ore, but we still need to look for copper and gold and rare earths and other minerals that are going to sustain our mining industry for the years to come.
Okay, so you mentioned about federal cabinet ministers too from WA. You were referring to the federal cabinet there, I'm assuming.
Correct.
Matthias
yeah.
Cormann
and Christian Porter. So what we need is a concerted effort to get the government to tell the banks, number one, that raising equity is income, and we have had a drop in that because one thing that most people who invest during this time, they want to keep their money in cash, so they don't invest. So that's been the drop off. They don't want to take any risks. But you know, 5 years ago, everyone was putting money into these sorts of companies. But it don't only affect us. I mean, it affects the biotech companies as well that are in the same boat, and they're trying to find a cure or a vaccine for Wuhan virus. So it is difficult for them as well because this category is not being looked at by the government. So in two very, very important industries in Australia, being the biotech industry and being the exploration industry, there's no funding available. There's no way we can prove a drop in income because we have no income.
Okay, so what you're saying then is there needs to be some kind of conduit between government and banks to tell the banks that raising equity is income.
Correct. Yeah, that's one way of doing it, and telling the ATO, which is looking after JobKeeper, that a drop in the equity raising is more or less a drop in the income. So they allow companies like ours to keep our geologists, our geophysicists, our staff on site working through this. Otherwise, it's just going to shut down a whole industry. And, you know, the future of Australia in new mines being opened up has just been stopped for this period, which is just wrong.
Are you being supported by any peer groups, by other like-minded people within the industry, within your niche, Tony?
Yeah, look, we are. I mean, most of the other explorers, I mean, there's about 300 that are affected. And in the biotech space, it's about 50 or 60. And we estimate that's about 20,000 people that it's employed. So it's a big employment number that the government's basically forcing onto the dole rather than onto JobKeeper, where we want to keep these staff. So yeah, it's a concerted effort by all of us to get the story out. And like I said, you've got two very senior West Australian cabinet ministers that don't seem to realise, and we're the ones most affected in this state because of our heavy reliance on the exploration industry.
All right, all things being equal, when do you think these explorations can get back online?
Oh, look, immediately. I mean, we want to be able to, we can get, just like the miners as essential workers in the northwest, our assets are up there as well. So for the one in WA, we want to be able to get our geologists up on site and start their work immediately. Once they obviously get a target, the drillers then come on site and then they employ people. So it is a big industry. There are explorers out there that are billion-dollar companies. There are miners, but they're still exploring. So they're allowed to go, but they've got a cash flow that can prove that they do need, or they don't really need the funds like the smaller companies. So Sandfire, for example, is still drilling but they're a billion-dollar company. They don't really need help from the government. It's just the smaller ones that have, and there's about 300 of us that do really need this funding or the loans from the bank.
You mentioned your project up the north of WA. What's the name of that project, and what's the size of it? What's the prospectivity of it like?
Look, we're very excited. It's near Marble Bar, about 180k away from Marble Bar. It's called Hillside. We've had some very, very good numbers come out in our soil sampling. We've done a drill program itself, and we did hit gold and copper. So at 60 metres, so what we want to be able to do is a bit more preparatory work, geophysics work, get a couple of geos up there now, and then when we are allowed to mobilise more readily after this sort of mini crisis is over, we'll be able to just go straight up with drill rigs and hit it. Hit the targets where we want to drill. So it's very, very important work. We'd have to shut that down and put the geologists off and the field hands off unless we get some sort of support, because there's no money in most of these companies at the moment.
I understand you're also looking at importing about 500,000 coronavirus test kits into the country. What's all that about?
Yeah, look, it's very important, especially for the mining industry. I mean, you would have seen in the papers in the last few days or on the news that Rio Tinto have already got some of these kits. It doesn't actually test for the coronavirus itself. It tests for the antibody, so it's an antibody test. But if you test positive, 90% of over 95% of the time, you've actually got the coronavirus. So, yeah, it's very, very important that these test kits are out in testing the community. I think what most companies and most governments want is when people are actually going back to work, they can actually be tested before they get back, before they infect anyone else. So it's a small pinprick. It takes a bit of blood. You put it in the container, and within 10 minutes you'll know if you're clear or not clear for the antibody. If you're say tested positive for the antibody, over 95% of the time you've actually got the virus, so you can actually go straight to the corona test, which at the moment is in the laboratory. As you know, it's very, very time consuming and costly. So if you pass this one antibody test, you're more than likely clear over 95% of the time. So when people start going back to work, I think these test kits and the governments would want most people tested so they don't infect anyone else. So it's a very, very good idea. I noticed Rio Tinto are already doing it for all their mine staff before they hop the plane to go, their FIFO workers before they get on the plane.
Is there a timeline as to when they actually get here, Tony?
Yeah, look, we've got our first batch through into Perth today, actually. So we're sending them out to get tested by various companies that are interested in buying them. They'll do their own tests, even though they got the TGA approval. So yeah, we can bring in initially 500,000, and then we'll go from there. But if you look at what's happening around the world, most governments want a lot of the population tested before they go back to work. So we'll end up needing millions of these test kits. Yeah, lots of interest, and not only from Australian governments. We've also got some interest elsewhere because of the TGA approval. I mean, a lot of countries can go directly to China and buy them, but given the trouble that they've had in those three countries I mentioned, Italy, Germany, and Spain, they are now looking for countries like ours with a TGA approval, America with the FDA approval, and what they would like to do is actually only use those. So we've got a march on a few people with this TGA approval, and so maybe governments, and we're talking to someone in the Malaysian government, we're talking to someone in the Dubai government as well. So hopefully it's going to take off. And like I said, I think most employers that want to start up again would want their employees tested before they go back to work. And each test would probably cost $70 or $80 Australian. And I think that's relatively cheap compared to getting someone to do an actual coronavirus test, which has to go through pathology. And I think the Australian government's paying somewhere between $300 and $400 for each test through Medicare.
Coronavirus has obviously impacted on the ALeague season, Tony. Perth Glory Football Club, which you are the sole owner of, hasn't kicked a ball since last month. Again, the impact of COVID-19 causing tough times for everyone at the club.
Yeah, look, it's very difficult. I've been a passionate owner. I feel sorry for the players. I feel sorry for my staff. But we are where we are. We can't travel. We looked at, as you know, getting everyone to New South Wales about 4 weeks ago to play all the games. But then New Zealand government slapped a ban on anyone travelling overseas. So, that meant Wellington couldn't play. So that plan got abandoned. Yeah, look, it's a very difficult situation. I don't think it'll be resolved in the short term. Lots of things are happening with other sports in a similar position. But we were in a more unique position because our season had almost finished. Therefore, we depleted our membership and our corporate funds. Whereas the other sports like the AFL, I mean, the Eagles and Dockers just received all their membership money, just received all their corporate dollars. So they're pretty well flush with cash now. They've obviously got to let it last, but they had the cash in the bank, whereas clubs in the ALeague had depleted all that. So we have no funds left in the bank, and we're relying on funds coming in for memberships for next year, which we can't sell right now because we don't know when the season will start. I mean, if the WA government does close borders for 6 months, Perth won't be able to play in the ALeague starting in October. So it's a lot of things are up in the air. So that's why business decisions now are very important.
All right. Well, I'll explore that last observation with you in just a moment. But I just want to go back a bit. As a result of the impact of COVID-19 and the suspension of the league, you were criticised quite quickly and loudly by the players' union when you decided to, I guess, stand down players and staff. Other clubs immediately followed suit within a day, or so did several other clubs, I should say. Was that criticism by the PFA warranted?
Of course not. No, I mean, if you look at all the other codes, similar things were done. I did mine without pay because I have no money in the bank to pay them because of the reasons I just outlined. So, yeah, very unfair criticism. They quickly, once all the other clubs did the same as Perth Glory, they stopped their legal action, which is good. And now we're in dialogue with them. We've appointed one of our club chairmen to see through the talks with the PFA. But I think what they've got to realise is there is a difference between the AFL, NRL and the A-League, as I outlined. They're just starting their season, so they've got a lot more cash in the bank. And we don't know if we can start the season in October this year. And, given what the Premier of our state said, that no interstate travel for a long period of time, I mean, that might get resolved. But right now, I don't think we can start in October. So, I've got a plan to keep Perth Glory afloat. I don't want it to fold like Virgin. I don't want that to happen. So, the players and the staff have got to realise in every club that the owners are under extreme pressure. And if we can't play this year, what do you do? And that's a straight business decision. In the old days, before the virus, we would be classified as trading insolvent. So you really can't make any irrational business decisions by just saying, let's just go ahead and pay our players $3 million or $4 million a year when they're not playing and they might not be able to play. So it's a very, very difficult one.
So you don't think the interrupted season as it is right now will resume at all? The governing body, the FFA, has said it'll make an announcement at the end of May. If we look at the data for WA right now, where we're getting, overnight we had 0 cases and very low numbers just prior to that. So you're not feeling optimistic that perhaps there could be a resumption of play in another month or so?
No, I don't feel that because the Premier has made it very clear that the interstate borders are closed. So how do we get a team anywhere? So that's what I'm going on, the guidelines that the Premier has set out. He may change his mind on that, but right this second, I have to plan for no season. There's no finish to this season, and if the government sticks to its original announcement saying 6 months with no interstate travel, we won't be starting in October as well. So I've got to actually plan for that, and I can't plan any other way other than that edict that Perth Glory won't be allowed to travel. There may be exemptions, who knows? But right now he said that for 6 months the borders are closed. So I have to plan the way I run my business, which it is a business, just like any other business, on those instructions.
Okay, Tony. Well, as you say, you've been running the club as a business over the past 12 years, which has seen you lose roughly around $30 million, give or take. You were, just prior to this, you were in the spotlight and criticised for flirting with the prospect of merging the club with the London Football Exchange. It involved cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. What was all that? What was that deal all about, Tony? Because a lot of people are still confused and sort of still puzzled by it. Just in a very brief nutshell, tell us what the idea behind it was at all, because there was a lot of misinterpretation around it at the time.
Yeah, just firstly, let me correct something. I don't ever, and I've never said I lost 30 million. I've invested over 30 million, and I still see it as an investment, and I still think that Perth Glory Football Club and the ALeague would be a very big part of the sporting landscape in Australia. So I see it as an investment, not a loss. Going on that, I've mentioned now for at least 18 months, given the strength and financial backing of a lot of clubs over east with the international owners, Perth Glory to compete needs a fresh injection of capital. I haven't got that capital available, so I've been looking for partners for that period of time. The London Football Exchange had a unique idea. They split into two. They had a cryptocurrency side and they had a football side. I was going to be running the football side with no link to the crypto side other than an investment in the football side. And they were going to buy 7 clubs around the world, which I would have been heavily involved in that. And that to me was a dream job. The football side would run independently to the crypto side. So the crypto side, basically they went out and raised funds to do this project. They were trading their coins on market, and at one point the coin value was close to £400 million. So they had plenty of money and backing to buy into Perth Glory. So it was an 80%. So the LFE Football Exchange would buy that, and funded by the LFE Crypto Exchange. So it was never the case where the crypto company would actually run Perth Glory Football Club, or in fact the other 7 clubs that they wanted.
And which football clubs use crypto in their assets right now? I know there's a few right around
the world,
particularly in Europe.
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 in the Premier League. Arsenal, Man City, Barcelona are very big into it, but it's slightly different what they do with their crypto coins. So you buy the coins and you get discounts on membership, merchandise. Even when you go into the grounds, some of the outlets that sell the catering, beer, over here, hot dogs or whatever, you get discounts by using your crypto currency coins. So this was a little bit further advanced than that. The actual crypto coin that you own gives you access to 7 clubs around the world. So you buy, instead of buying a Bayern Munich or a Barcelona coin, you would buy a coin in the LFE crypto, and that gives you access to all of the other clubs that would be run under this banner. So to me, it was a very, very innovative and good way of doing it. And, I got sold into it. As you know, the history, I went to London, and I think you've got a few questions on that, so let you ask them.
Well, it came to light that the person involved with the LFE, the crypto part of it, had a checkered history, had been in prison and changed his name. That was a deal breaker, I imagine.
Yeah, it was a deal breaker because ownership of any club around the world through FIFA guidelines means you have to be a fit and proper person. And one of those fit and proper person rules is, have you been convicted of a crime? He was convicted of a crime. I found out while I was in London. I immediately rang the FFA and said they will not be receiving any proposal from me once I found that out. And then I was flying back, and it broke on the front page of the West Australian. So I'd already made my decision once that got told, because but they had money in the bank. They had already listed their crypto coin. But yeah, you just can't be a owner of a club, and he would have been an owner through the crypto side into the football side.
What other financial interests are you pursuing, if any, to prop up the club in the future? You've said just now that you've made it no secret that in the last 18 months you've been looking for another investor/partner. Are there opportunities out there for you to assist you in facilitating and funding the club in the future?
Look, it's very difficult during this Wuhan virus stage. I mean, as I said to you before, with investors in exploration, people are keeping their cash. So it's very difficult now to go up, especially when the future of the leagues, sporting leagues all around the world, are up in the air. No one knows when they're going to reopen. No one knows when they're going to start. I really do hope, as a fanatical Eagles fan, that the AFL gets up and running when they want to, in probably June or July. I mean, that's going to be good for all sports, because that would put a lot of pressure on the state government if they decided to relax the rules on interstate travel. That would all, they couldn't obviously let the Eagles and Dockers fly out and not let the Western Force or Perth Glory fly out. So there would be, I believe, a uniform rule for sporting teams if they go that way. I mean, he's shown to be a very strong leader. If his conviction is no travel for 6 months, there won't be. So we'll see what happens there. But finding a partner in these times has been very, very difficult. So I believe the decisions that each club will make over the next 2 or 3 weeks, we don't even know. It's been highly speculated in the press. We don't even know if we have a broadcast deal going forward, and that would make a massive difference, because over 50% of the revenue comes from our broadcast partners, and if they pull the pin, they haven't as yet. There's meetings going on all this week with our broadcast partner. But if that doesn't happen, Capo, that's another 50% of our income gone. I can't sell memberships. That's impossible. Corporate sponsors, I can't sell. So, what do you do when you have zero income and a wage bill of $4.5 million? What do you do? So I hope that gets to all the people listening. It's not an owner being cheap or throwing out the rules. There's no income. What do you do? It's a very, very hard question, but it is a business. And when there's no income, you have to make very difficult decisions.
Well, that leads me to probably one of my last questions, Tony, based on all that. Will Perth Glory be under the ownership of Tony Sage in 2020-21?
Well, I believe it will, but hard decisions have to be made beforehand to make Perth Glory survive. As I said, when any business has no income and an expense of $4.5 million, things have to give, right? And that's the point I'm trying to make to the players, to the staff. Things have to move. But Perth Glory will survive at the end of it, and I'll make sure of that, and I still will be owner of the club in that time. But difficult decisions have to be made by each club owner, not only in our sport, but all sports, and you'll see that across the board in NRL and AFL over the next 18 months.
Well, the floor is yours, Tony. When you say things have to give in terms of the league, and it's a business decision, and clubs have to make hard decisions. Well, ideally, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what does the Tony Sage crystal ball tell you in terms of how the ALeague will have to work and how they have to innovate itself to survive the impact of this crisis come the next season, the seasons that follow? Because what you're saying is money is tight, the opportunities are limited. So therefore, what has to give?
Well, obviously, like it has been in the AFL, NRL, Super Rugby, there has to be a concerted effort by the PFA to cut salaries of the players. That's number one. Obviously, as you've seen with every sport, there's staff cuts of between, I've seen 70% of the FFA, 80% of the AFL, 95% of the staff in some of the other sporting organisations have gone. So, that's a starting point, and people don't want to hear it, but that's the starting point. And we're not the only ones doing it. So I made a hard decision very early to stand down players and staff without pay. That saved the club a lot of money to make sure that in 2021 we will be survived and hopefully get stronger. Now, what do I envisage? I envisage maybe a start in January if the travel bans are not lifted, so I can't see it. By then, the crowds will be allowed to return. I believe the Victorian government, which has been the harshest on these measures, has said no crowds until 2021. So let's say that that's replicated across the board. There'll be no crowds. So how do you sell memberships, which is probably 30% of the income of Perth Glory, if there's no crowds? So these sorts of things have to be kept in mind when you're discussing the future. We'd have to, if Fox have indeed broken the contract and will not broadcast from next year, there's another huge hurdle. We have to go to maybe a free-to-air network. We may have to go and be innovative and go to an Apple TV, an Optus type of arrangement. No one knows. These are all things that are tickling around in my brain to see how we can continue, because we do need broadcast dollars, but especially if there's no crowds allowed into the stadiums for the whole of this year. So, Kappa, it's very, very difficult, but we're not the only sport to go through it. So everyone says that. The bright side is we've got 2 million registered players in football. The AFL have 600 odd, the NRL 400. So we're well advanced to continue into the future with a massive participation rate in our sport.
All right, Tony Sage, on that note, we will leave it there. A very wide-ranging interview on the Small Caps podcast today. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Kappa. Enjoy the day.